Whispers at Woodsmoke Ranch. Danny cut the engine of the SUV as they rolled to a stop beneath the arching sign that read, Woodsmoke Ranch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the abandoned campground. Weeds poked through cracks in the old parking lot asphalt, and an empty flagpole clanged softly in the breeze. Danny pushed his sunglasses up onto his head and grinned at his friends. "This is it, guys," he announced, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Woodsmoke Ranch. Told you I'd get us here before dark." Claire stepped out of the car and stretched, her auburn ponytail swaying. She surveyed the surroundings with a cautious curiosity. The air was fresh, with a scent of pine and distant wood smoke, as if the land remembered countless campfires that once burned here every summer. A tingle of excitement and apprehension danced in her chest. She had agreed to this weekend camping trip mostly because Danny was so enthusiastic about it, but also out of her own love for adventure. Still, something about the silent, deserted camp made the hairs on her arms prickle. Mike slammed the trunk and pulled out their tents and gear. "Home sweet haunted home," he joked, kicking a rock off the cracked pavement. Mike's carefree grin belied a nervous energy. He always used humor to mask his unease. A lifelong skeptic of ghost stories, he had initially laughed at the idea of staying at a supposedly haunted campground. But now that they were here, even he felt quiet for a moment, eyeing the dark outlines of old cabins beyond the tree line. Jenna lingered by the car door, adjusting her flannel shirt and backpack. She was the last to step out, her eyes wide behind her glasses as she took in the historic campground. Jenna had been the one to first bring up Woodsmoke Ranch after reading about it on a local Legends website. Usually shy, she had surprised everyone by pushing for this trip. For her, it was an opportunity to experience a place touched by mystery, and maybe spark inspiration for her own writing. But now, standing in the real thing, even Jenna felt a flutter of doubt. The silence was deep, broken only by the creak of the old swing set in the breeze and the distant caw of a crow. They gathered their supplies and passed under the wooden ranch gate. The dirt path, crunching under their boots, led toward what used to be the main campground. Faded cabins, their paint peeling and windows dusty, stood like sentinels on either side of an overgrown field. A dilapidated sign nearby read, "Welcome campers," hanging lopsided on one chain. The group exchanged glances. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched by 1,000 eyes of the past?" Jenna murmured, half in awe, half in nerves. Danny chuckled and gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Just think of it as stepping back in time. My dad used to say he came here for summer camp when he was a kid. Place shut down in the late 80s, I think. It's kind of cool to see it now, right? Like a time capsule." His tone was upbeat, the fearless leader of their small expedition. Claire managed a smile. "It's definitely atmospheric." She chose her words carefully, not wanting to spook Jenna or encourage Mike's jokes. In truth, the emptiness of Woodsmoke Ranch was more than just atmospheric. It was unsettling. There was an echo of laughter and life that seemed to hang in the air, but it was only a memory. And now it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, watching them trespass on its secrets. They found a relatively clear patch near the old fire circle, a ring of stones blackened by long dead fires, and decided to set up camp. As they pitched 2 tents, one for Danny and Mike and one for Claire and Jenna, the setting sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and purples. Long shadows reached out from the trees as daylight waned. Claire hammered the last stake into the ground and wiped her brow, noticing how quickly the temperature was dropping with the sun. Mike was busy untangling a string of battery-powered lights to hang inside the tents. "So, how about a campfire? Fearless leader," he called to Danny. "What's camping at Camp Spooky without s'mores and ghost stories?" His tone was playful, but his eyes flicked warily toward the encroaching dark. Danny was already one step ahead, gathering fallen branches from the edge of the woods. "On it," he said. "Claire, can you grab the fire starter from my pack?" Claire nodded and retrieved the small lighter and bundle of kindling. As she did, she heard a soft rustling just beyond the tree line. She paused, peering into the woods. The trees stood tall and close-knit, their branches intertwining like skeletal arms. In the dimming light, it would be easy to imagine figures between those trunks. Claire squinted, heart skipping, thinking she saw a flicker of movement. But Jenna walked between her and the trees, breaking her line of sight. "Got the marshmallows!" Jenna said cheerily, holding up a bag as she returned from the car. Claire let out a breath and smiled at her friend, deciding it was nothing. Probably just a deer or the wind stirring the brush. Before long, they had a modest campfire crackling in the old fire circle. Night settled fully over Woodsmoke Ranch, with a moonless sky blanketing the campground in darkness. The little fire cast dancing shadows on the surrounding pines, and the abandoned cabin walls not far off. They set out camp chairs and huddled close to the warmth, the four of them roasting hot dogs and marshmallows. Above, the stars were brilliant pinpricks in a vast void. Claire found herself staring upward between bites of a sticky s'more, marveling at how many more stars were visible out here, far from city lights. Danny followed her gaze and reached over to squeeze her hand with a smile. In moments like this, any lingering anxiety she had about the trip melted away. For a while, they chatted about school, work, and plans for the summer. Mike recounted a funny story about nearly tipping a canoe on a previous camping trip, drawing genuine laughter that echoed out into the emptiness. The camaraderie eased the sense of isolation. When the conversation lulled, Jenna unzipped her backpack and pulled out a worn printout of an old news article. "Since we're here, do you guys want to hear the actual story of what happened at Woodsmoke Ranch?" she asked, her voice hushed but excited. The firelight reflected in her eyes as she looked around the circle. Mike groaned theatrically. "Here we go. The reason Jenna dragged us out here. Ghost story time." "Shush," Claire elbowed him. "I want to hear it." In truth, Claire was as curious as she was uneasy. It was better to know what haunts might be lurking in their imaginations at a place like this. Danny poked the fire with a stick, sending a swirl of sparks up into the night. "Lay it on us," he said to Jenna. "What's the legend?" Jenna cleared her throat and smoothed out the paper on her knee. "Okay, so back in 1989, Woodsmoke Ranch was a summer camp for kids. One July, a boy named Tommy Martinez, 8 years old, went missing from his cabin." She glanced up to make sure everyone was listening. They were rapt. The night seemed to grow quieter, as if even the woods were listening. "All the campers and counselors searched for him," Jenna continued. "They combed the woods, the lake, everywhere, but he was just gone. Eventually, the official story was that he must have gotten lost in the forest and, didn't make it." She swallowed, the unspoken end of that sentence hanging in the air. "His body was never found. A year later, the camp closed down. Parents didn't want to send their kids here after that." A log cracked in the fire, making Claire jump slightly. Danny put an arm around her shoulders. "Is that it?" Mike asked, eyebrows raised. "Missing kid, tragic, but where does the haunting part come in?" Jenna held up a finger, adjusting her glasses. "I'm getting to that. So, over the years, people in town started reporting weird things around these woods. Hikers hearing a child's voice whispering for help, or campers finding small handprints on their tents in the morning." Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Unconsciously, she edged her chair a little closer to Danny. Jenna lowered her voice. "Some people claim Tommy's spirit roams here, looking for someone to help him or play with him. They say on quiet nights you can hear him whispering, especially near the old cabins." She pointed behind them to the row of dark, lifeless cabins that lurked just beyond the firelight. The empty windows looked like black eyes. For a moment, none of them spoke. A gentle breeze sighed through the pines, and the swing set in the distance creaked again. It almost sounded like a child's whimper. Claire broke the silence. "That's really sad," she murmured. As an aspiring teacher, the thought of a lost child tugged at her heart. She imagined a little boy alone in those woods, scared and cold. Danny gave her shoulder a little squeeze. "It is. But a whispering ghost kid? Come on, that's probably just local folklore." Mike, trying to lighten the mood again, laughed and tossed a peanut into the fire. "Yeah, or chipmunks messing with campers. Handprints could be a raccoon with tiny paws." Jenna wasn't done. She raised another finger. "There's more. Another story. Some think it wasn't just an accident, that a counselor had something to do with it. There were rumors about one of the camp counselors back then, a guy named Richard Hale. Some say he was a bit unhinged. One theory is that he led Tommy away from the camp as some kind of sick prank or worse." Mike scoffed, but his voice held a nervous edge. "Let me guess, the counselor went crazy, and now he's an axe-murdering ghost?" Jenna shrugged. "Close. The legend goes that guilt, or fear of being found out, drove Richard Hale to hang himself in these woods after the camp closed. His body was found near where Tommy went missing, swinging from a tree." She paused for effect, then added softly, "And on some nights, people claim you can see a figure hanging in the trees, or a tall shadow wandering between the cabins, as if still searching, or hunting." This time, even Danny didn't have a quick joke or reassuring comment. He stared at the fire, jaw tight. Claire could tell the story was unsettling him more than he'd admit. A sudden rustling in the bushes behind them made all four jump. Claire's heart leapt into her throat as Danny and Mike both shot to their feet. Danny aimed his flashlight at the darkness. The beam cut through the trees, illuminating nothing but swaying branches and an empty pathway. "Probably a deer," Danny said, though his voice was tense. Mike exhaled, muttering something about damn good timing, nature. They settled back down, laughing nervously at themselves, but the spell of the firelight's storytelling was broken. The dark seemed a little deeper now, the silence heavier. Jenna folded her article printout and put it away. "It's probably all just stories," she said softly, almost apologetically. "Yeah," Danny agreed, forcing a grin. "Ghosts aren't real. But if Tommy's ghost comes asking for a s'more, I'll be sure to share." He winked at Claire, trying to ease the tension. Claire smiled back, but her mind was on those whispers Jenna described. She could almost imagine hearing a faint "help me" in the crackle of the fire. She gave herself a mental shake. It was just her imagination, primed by spooky tales. By 11 p.m., they decided to turn in. The fire was doused with dirt and the last drops from a water bottle, leaving the campground in near total darkness. They had 2 tents set a few yards apart. Jenna and Claire crawled into one, while Danny and Mike took the other. Claire zipped up the tent flap, shutting out the night. Inside, the air was a little stuffy and carried the plasticky smell of new tent material. Jenna clicked on a battery lantern, casting a gentle white glow around them. "That story really got to me," Jenna admitted in a whisper as they settled into their sleeping bags. She lay on her back, fidgeting with the lantern's handle. "I kept thinking I might see something out there beyond the fire." Claire turned on her side to face her friend. "Me too," she confessed. "But you know Mike and Danny, they'd never admit if they were scared. I guess it falls to us to be the cautious ones." Jenna offered a small smile. "Thanks for coming, by the way. I know this isn't exactly a 5-star vacation spot." Claire reached over and squeezed Jenna's hand. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be to get creeped out." She laughed quietly. "Honestly, it's kind of exciting. Scary, but exciting. And I'm glad I'm here with you guys." They turned off the lantern and lay in the darkness. The distant sound of Mike and Danny's low murmurs in the other tent was comforting. Claire closed her eyes, willing herself to relax. Eventually, the soft chirp of crickets and the whisper of wind in the pines lulled her towards sleep. Sometime deep in the night, Claire woke with a start. For a moment, she didn't know why. The world was silent outside the tent. Eerily silent. The crickets had gone still. Jenna's gentle snores beside her were the only sound. Claire strained her ears. What woke me up? She wondered. Then she heard it again. A faint whisper. Her heart thumped. It sounded like a child's voice, but she couldn't make out words. It was as if someone were speaking just outside the tent, hushed and hurried. It lasted only a second, then was gone. Claire held her breath, her mind racing. Just the wind, she told herself. The wind in the trees can sound like voices. She had been primed by Jenna's ghost story, that was all. Every little noise would seem ominous now. She was about to settle back down when a soft tap, tap, tap came from the other side of the nylon wall. It was as if something or someone was gently poking or brushing the tent. Claire's throat tightened. Fear rooted her in place. The tapping stopped, but in its place came a faint scratching sound, moving along the side of the tent. She reached out with trembling fingers and nudged Jenna. Jenna inhaled sharply as she woke. What? She mumbled, still half asleep. Claire whispered directly into her ear, barely audible. Listen. They both fell silent, listening. The scratching had stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Claire wondered if she'd imagined it all. The whisper, the taps, the scratch. She was about to apologize to Jenna for waking her when a new sound made them both freeze. A child's giggle, soft and muffled, drifted from somewhere outside. Jenna sat bolt upright, her eyes wide in the darkness. She had heard it too. Claire felt Jenna's hand grip her arm, nails digging in. The giggle was brief and oddly cut off, as if suddenly stifled. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Claire's mind raced. It couldn't actually be a child. Not out here at 3 a.m. in an abandoned camp. And it didn't sound like any of the guys trying to prank them. It was far too small and real. Jenna leaned close to Claire, her voice a trembling thread. That's not... It can't be... Claire didn't answer. She carefully reached over and unzipped the window flap of the tent just an inch, peering out into the night. The dying embers of their campfire cast a very faint reddish glow, but beyond that it was darkness and shapes of trees. She saw nothing moving, no sign of life. The swing set was a black outline against the starry sky, utterly still now. Gathering her courage, Claire cleared her throat and called quietly, "Danny? Mike? Is that you?" She tried to keep her voice steady, but it came out in a harsh whisper. No response. The men were likely asleep. Or if they were awake, they'd be responding or laughing by now, if it was a prank. Jenna, emboldened by Claire's attempt, found the flashlight by her sleeping bag and clicked it on. She aimed the beam at the tent wall where the sounds had come from. The pale light revealed the nylon surface, and for a split second, the shadow of a small hand pressed against the tent from outside. Both women sucked in a breath. Jenna dropped the flashlight with a thud, and the beam flickered out. In that same instant, the hand shadow was gone. Claire's heart was hammering so loudly she thought she'd scream. She scrambled for the zipper of the tent door, yelling now, "Danny! Mike!" Panic edged her voice. Jenna was shaking, half tangled in her sleeping bag, as she tried to get up. Claire yanked the zipper, and a blast of cold night air flooded in as she flung the tent flap open. She pointed her own flashlight into the darkness, illuminating the spot where the hand would have been. Nothing. Only trampled grass and the edge of the woods a few yards beyond. No footprints that she could see in the wavering light. No child. No creature. By now, Danny and Mike were stirring next door. "Claire!" Danny's voice came muffled, followed by the sound of their tent zipper opening. A second later, Danny appeared, barefoot and alarmed, with Mike right behind, holding a lantern. "What's going on?" Danny asked, rushing to Claire's side. He scanned the darkness with protective intensity, ready to confront anything. Claire realized she was standing outside now, in her pajamas, sock feet on the cold ground. She felt exposed and a little foolish, but the image of that tiny hand on the tent kept her resolve firm. "We heard something and saw..." She trailed off, unsure how to explain. "A kid," Jenna finished for her, crawling out of the tent with the flashlight clutched in her hand. Her face was pale. "We heard a child laughing, and then we saw a hand on the wall of the tent." Mike's lantern light swayed as his hand shook slightly. "Very funny, you two," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Danny frowned. "We were asleep. We didn't hear anything until you shouted." He looked around, perplexed. "There's no one here but us?" Claire felt frustration rising, along with lingering fear. "I'm not making it up, Mike. Jenna saw it too." Jenna nodded vehemently. "It was real. It was small. Like a kid's hand." The four of them clustered together in the dark clearing between the tents. Danny handed Claire his flashlight so she could double up on scanning their perimeter. They saw and heard nothing more, just the quiet rustle of leaves and their own breathing. After a thorough look around their campsite, Danny tried to reassure them. "No one's out here. If it was an animal, it's gone now. If it was..." He hesitated. "Something else. Well, it's not showing itself anymore." Mike put an arm around Jenna. "Maybe we just dreamt it." "Mass hysteria?" He attempted a chuckle. "Group hallucination under the spooky influence of Jenna's ghost stories." Claire shot him a look. "Both of us saw the same thing, Mike." "That wasn't a raccoon or the wind." Jenna's eyes filled with worry. "Maybe it was Tommy. What if his spirit really is here?" Silence fell. No one had a snappy answer to that. Eventually, Danny exhaled and rubbed his forehead. "Look, it's the middle of the night. We're all exhausted and on edge. Why don't we stoke the fire a bit and sit up together for a while until we feel calmer? I don't think any of us is eager to go right back to sleep." They all readily agreed. No one wanted to be alone in a tent right now. Mike grabbed more firewood, and Danny rekindled the embers until a warm flame was going again. They huddled around it with blankets wrapped over their shoulders. Jenna made hot chocolate with a small kettle over the fire, her hands still trembling as she poured. As the hot liquid soothed their nerves, they discussed the incident in low voices. Danny suggested it truly might have been a local kid playing a prank, perhaps a family camping somewhere nearby. But deep down, each of them knew how unlikely that was. They had driven a long way up a dirt road to reach the secluded place. They'd seen no other cars or signs of people. Mike reluctantly admitted he had heard what sounded like a giggle just before Claire yelled. He had dismissed it as a dream at first, but now he looked troubled. If it was a kid, where did they go? We would have heard them running off or something. No one had an answer. Jenna stayed mostly quiet, sipping her drink. Finally, she spoke up softly. "Maybe we should leave first thing in the morning." Danny looked at her and then the others. He was clearly torn. He had hoped this would be a fun trip, and he wasn't one to give up easily. "Let's see how we feel in daylight, okay? If anyone still wants to leave, we will." "Deal?" "Deal," Claire said. She appreciated that he didn't dismiss their fears outright. They stayed by the fire until drowsiness overcame adrenaline once more. Nothing else unusual happened during the early morning hours. Eventually, one by one, they retreated back to their tents. This time, Danny insisted Claire and Jenna take his tent, and he and Mike would keep watch by the fire until dawn. Claire, too tired to protest, murmured thanks, and crawled into the tent, Jenna following. Throughout the remainder of the night, Claire drifted in and out of a light sleep. Each time she woke, she saw the silhouette of either Danny or Mike sitting by the quietly crackling fire, standing guard against the darkness. Sunlight broke through the trees at last, and with it came a sense of relief that washed over the camp. The events of the night felt almost unreal in the light of day. The forest seemed ordinary again. Chirping birds, golden shafts of sun, the smell of dew on grass. They emerged from their tents, bleary-eyed. Danny had managed to nap in the early dawn after Mike had taken the last watch. All four looked exhausted, but daylight brought back some optimism. While Claire and Jenna prepared a simple breakfast of granola and dried fruit, Danny and Mike circled the campsite one more time to look for any evidence of a nocturnal visitor. They found nothing except their own footprints and gear. However, just as they were returning, something by the old cabin nearest to their site caught Danny's eye. "Hold up," he said to Mike, and jogged a few yards over to the sagging wooden structure. Its door hung slightly ajar, hinges rusted. On the door, faint but unmistakable, were scratches. Long, uneven gouges in the wood, as if made by fingernails or small claws. Danny touched them gently. They were not there when the group arrived the day before. He was sure he would have noticed. Mike peered over his shoulder. "Animal marks?" he wondered aloud. Danny frowned. The marks were at about the height an 8-year-old child might reach. By the time they returned to the girls, Danny decided not to mention the scratches. No need to freak everyone out further. Instead, he proposed a distraction. How about a little exploration after breakfast? Daylight ghost hunting, he added, with a wink, trying to keep it light. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You mean check out the old camp buildings?" She wasn't sure she wanted to step inside those silent, dusty cabins, but curiosity gnawed at her. Jenna seemed hesitant, but she nodded slowly. "Maybe we can find something that explains last night," she offered. Mike popped a few raisins into his mouth and mustered a grin. "Why not? Scooby-Doo gang goes investigating. As long as I get to say jinkies at some point." Claire managed to laugh, appreciating Mike's attempt to break the tension. After eating, they set off as a group toward the row of derelict cabins. The morning air was cool and still. A faint mist from the night clung in the low pockets of the field. As they walked, a subtle feeling nagged at Claire. That sense of being watched returned, but whenever she glanced over her shoulder, she saw nothing but swaying grass and sunlit trees. The first cabin had been the one where Danny saw the scratches. In full daylight, the old building looked less threatening and more pitiable. A forgotten relic. They pushed the door open with a long groan of the hinge. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight that streamed through a hole in the roof. Inside, bunk beds stood in disarray, mattresses long gone, frames mottled with rust. A few abandoned items lay scattered: a mildewed sneaker, a torn sleeping bag, a plastic cup with a faded camp logo. Jenna picked up the cup, wiping dirt off the side, to read the words. "Woodsmoke Ranch, Summer '89, she read aloud. Her voice echoed slightly in the empty cabin. Claire felt a shiver. 1989, the summer Tommy disappeared. She wandered towards a bunk and noticed something carved into the wood of the bed frame. Leaning in, she could make it out, TM in rough letters next to a little stick figure etched with a nail or knife. TM, she said softly, Tommy Martinez. Danny and Jenna came over to look. It indeed looked like a child's carving. Danny exhaled. So this was his cabin. Mike, who had been lingering by the doorway, shifted uncomfortably. "Guys, I'm not sure this is such a good idea." Claire turned. What do you mean? Mike ran a hand through his hair, digging into this stuff. If there is something here, maybe we shouldn't stir it up. For Mike, the perpetual skeptic, to say that, Claire realized he was more shaken than he let on. We came to find answers, didn't we? She said gently. If we find something that helps explain things, maybe it won't be so scary. He shrugged, but didn't argue further. Jenna took a few pictures on her phone of the carvings and the cabin interior. For my notes, she murmured. She tried to keep her tone academic, but her hands trembled. They searched a couple more cabins. In one, Claire found an old camp journal, its pages damp and chewed by mice. Flipping carefully through it, a page fell out. She caught it and realized it was from a local newspaper dated October 1989. The headline, Search Called Off for Missing Boy. A photo showed a young, smiling Hispanic boy in a scout's uniform. Tommy. The article mentioned camp counselor Richard Hale as the last person who saw the boy, saying Tommy had been sent to the showers before lights out and never returned. Jenna read the article over Claire's shoulder. That's right. I remember now, she said. Hale claimed Tommy must have wandered off after shower time. But some people suspected Hale because he had a breakdown after, and folks said he acted strangely during the search. Danny looked at the bottom of the clipping. It mentions Hale was questioned by police but never charged. Then a year later, they found his body in the woods. Claire tapped a part of the text. The deceased was discovered hanging from a tree. An apparent suicide. No note was found. She felt a wave of sadness and dread. Whatever happened here had destroyed 2 lives. Maybe more. They left the cabins and next explored what remained of the cafeteria hall, a larger building with broken windows and a caved-in roof corner. Pushing inside, they found long tables and benches covered in debris. Nature had started reclaiming the structure. A sapling grew up through a cracked floorboard, and moss coated the stone hearth of the fireplace. On the far wall, a faded mural of smiling cartoon woodland animals greeted them, a bitter contrast to the gloom. Claire could almost hear the ghostly echoes of children's laughter that once bounced off these walls. Jenna discovered a cork bulletin board near the kitchen hatch, with yellowed papers still pinned under a protective overhang. She carefully lifted a tattered flyer. It was a schedule of camp activities for the week of July 10th to 16th, 1989, the day Tommy vanished. Arts and crafts, hiking, swimming. Jenna listed softly, scanning the schedule until her finger landed on an entry. July 14th, campfire night and scary stories. Claire met her eyes. July 14th, 1989. Likely was the night Tommy disappeared after the campfire storytelling. Perhaps he had been spooked by a story, or someone took advantage of the darkness. Danny stepped back from the group, his gaze distant. I remember something, he said quietly. My dad told me a story about this place, but I always thought it was one of those made-up tales to scare kids into behaving. He said that when he was a camper here, a few years before Tommy went missing, they used to warn each other about the Whistler. Supposedly a ghost of an old groundskeeper who would whistle or whisper in the woods to lure kids away. Jenna's brow furrowed. I read a snippet about that on a forum. Could be the same story, just evolved over time. Mike frowned, hugging himself as if cold. Great. So we've got a missing kid ghost, a psycho counselor ghost, and a mysterious whistling groundskeeper ghost. This place is overcrowded with spirits. He tried to smile, but nobody laughed. Claire put a hand on Danny's arm. Why didn't you mention that before? Danny shrugged helplessly. I didn't think about it until now. And like I said, I never believed any of it. They left the mess hall, having had enough of the musty indoors. Outside, the sun was high and bright. It must have been near noon. They convened by their campsite again to discuss what to do. I'm honestly ready to leave, Jenna said, rubbing her arms, though it was warm out. We got what we came for, right? We experienced something. And we have some spooky memorabilia. She gestured to her phone and the newspaper clipping Claire still held. Mike readily agreed. I've had enough of playing Ghost Adventures. Claire looked at Danny. He seemed conflicted, eyes drifting to the surroundings. Leaving now means cutting the trip short, he said. But I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. He sighed, relenting. Okay, let's pack up. Relief was the predominant feeling as they all began to break down the tents and gather their scattered gear. Claire could tell Danny was a bit disappointed, but he tried to hide it under practical efficiency. She caught him scanning the tree line more than once, as if expecting to see someone standing there. Each time, his expression grew harder. It took about an hour to get everything repacked into the SUV. They worked in relative silence, each lost in thoughts about the night and the evidence they'd found. Claire found herself constantly looking over her shoulder. The feeling of being watched hadn't left. If anything, it had grown stronger, pressing on her like a weight. As they loaded the last cooler into the back, Jenna spoke up, her voice oddly distant. Do you hear that? They paused. Hear what? Danny asked. They stood still, holding their breaths. At first, all Claire heard was the rustle of leaves and a few birds. Then she caught it. A faint whistle, or perhaps a lilting hum, carried on the breeze. It sounded like a tune. A few notes of a lullaby whistled slowly. Mike's face went pale. Someone is out there, he muttered. He slammed the trunk shut. Let's go now. No one argued. They hastily clambered into the car, Danny in the driver's seat, Claire riding shotgun, Jenna and Mike in the back. As Danny turned the key in the ignition, the engine roared to life and they all exhaled in unison. Claire hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. The SUV bumped along the dirt road that led back toward the highway, leaving Woodsmoke Ranch behind. Claire looked out her window at the receding campground. The cabins stood silent guard, revealing nothing of their secrets in the daylight. For a brief moment between the trees, she thought she saw a figure standing near the old swings, a small boy with dark hair, watching them leave with forlorn eyes. She blinked, and he was gone. Her heart pounded. Had she really seen that? She almost spoke up, but the words died in her throat. Jenna was already upset, and they were leaving. No need to alarm everyone further. Maybe it was just my imagination, she assured herself, a trick of the light and my mind playing along. The dirt road stretched ahead, and after a few minutes they all began to relax. Mike even cracked a joke about how they'd ghosted the ghosts. Jenna managed a weak laugh. They were perhaps a mile out from the main camp area when the SUV lurched. The engine sputtered, and with a gut-wrenching jolt, the car stalled. Danny frowned and turned the key again. The engine whined but wouldn't catch. No, he muttered, pumping the gas and trying once more. The result was the same. The engine refused to start. What's wrong? Claire asked, her voice tense. I don't know, Danny said. It was fine a second ago. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. Mike leaned forward between the seats. You're kidding. This is not the time for a breakdown, man. Jenna looked over her shoulder out the back window, as if expecting to see something following. Please tell me we have cell signal now that we're away from the trees. She pulled out her phone, as did Claire. Both phones showed the same frustrating result. No service. Too much wilderness. They hadn't gotten any bars since yesterday. Danny hit the steering wheel lightly in frustration. The engine might be overheated or the fuel line. I don't know. I'll take a look. He popped the hood and reluctantly stepped out. Claire followed, though part of her wanted to stay locked in the car. The road they were on was basically a 2-track path through dense forest. They had made it far enough that the campground itself was out of sight around a bend. Out here, there was nothing but trees and silence. And them. Danny propped the hood and peered at the engine. He was handy with cars, but he looked baffled. Everything seems fine. Maybe it's the electrical. Mike got out too, unable to sit idle. Jenna scooted to the middle of the back seat, looking anxiously from side to side. Claire watched Danny check connections. He pulled the oil dipstick, shrugged, and then checked the battery terminals. Battery secure. This doesn't make sense. Mike shifted nervously. Let's just assume it's ghosts and run, he said flatly. No one laughed. Suddenly Jenna gasped, pressing herself against the back seat. I saw someone, she hissed, eyes wide, finger pointing shakily toward the woods. Claire and Mike snapped their heads in that direction. Claire's blood ran cold. A figure stood among the trees about 20 yards back down the road, partially obscured by shadows. It looked like a person, but something was off. They were too still, and the way the light dappled through leaves made it hard to make out features. Hey, do you need help? Danny called, noticing the others staring. He stepped forward a bit, raising a hand. The figure slid silently behind a trunk, vanishing from view. Hello. Danny tried again, walking a few paces down the road. Danny, don't, Claire whispered, fear sharpening her voice more than she intended. An instinct screamed inside her not to let him go near that figure. Danny halted, torn between the possibility of someone actually needing assistance and the danger they all felt in their guts. The forest was quiet again. Then, from somewhere to their left, that faint whistling tune drifted through the trees. The same melody Claire heard earlier, a slow, haunting nursery rhyme. The whistling turned into whispering, an unintelligible susurration that moved through the underbrush like a slithering snake. Jenna clambered out of the car to stand next to Claire, trembling. Mike positioned himself protectively near her. Who's there? Mike shouted, anger and fear mingling in his voice. This isn't funny. The whispering grew louder, seeming to circle them. Claire turned in a slow circle, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint the source. It was as if unseen mouths were all around, murmuring just out of comprehension. Suddenly, from the direction of the car, they heard a new sound. Thump. 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 As if something was hitting the back of the SUV. Danny spun around. Enough of this! He strode to the rear of the vehicle, where the hatch was closed, and peered into the woods behind it. The rest followed cautiously, clustering near the back of the SUV. On the dust-covered rear window, 4 fresh handprints were pressed against the glass from the outside. Small handprints, each about the size of a child's. Jenna let out a stifled cry. Claire felt the world tilt, stomach clenching in terror. They had been standing right there moments ago. No child had walked past them. Yet the prints were unmistakable, as if a group of children had silently pressed their hands to watch them through the window, or to try to get in. Danny backed away slowly, putting himself in front of Claire and Jenna. His protective instinct was in overdrive now. We're leaving. Screw the car. We go on foot, he said in a low, urgent voice. No one objected. They grabbed their backpacks from the open doors, taking only essentials like water, flashlights, and Jenna's phone with the photos. Mike kept hold of the lantern from the night before, his knuckles white around its handle. With one last fearful glance around, they left the SUV and began power walking down the dirt road in the direction of the highway, still miles away. It wasn't a short hike, but adrenaline propelled them. Claire's mind raced. Could this really be happening? Handprints appearing from nowhere, whispers circling them. If there was any doubt before, she was convinced now that something supernatural was stalking them. The group stayed close, practically shoulder to shoulder as they hurried along. Danny led the way, one hand holding a flashlight, the other gripping Claire's. Mike and Jenna followed right behind, Mike frequently checking over his shoulder. After about 10 minutes of near jogging down the trail, Jenna spoke in a hushed tone. "Do you hear anything?" They all paused, breathing hard, and listened. The forest had gone silent again. It was like even the birds and insects were hiding. Claire realized she preferred the noise. The silence was far more ominous. They started moving again, but a sinking realization hit Claire as she surveyed the trees. "Guys, are we sure we're going the right way?" she asked quietly. Danny slowed. "It's the same road we came in on. It only goes one way." Mike muttered, "Yeah, forward." But as they looked around, doubt crept in. The path seemed slightly different now. Was it narrower? Had they passed that large oak before? In their frenzy, maybe they'd missed a turn. But there were no forks in the road. Were there? Jenna pulled out her compass app on her phone. She frowned. "This doesn't make sense. According to this, we're going west." "So?" asked Mike. "We should be heading south-ish, toward the highway," Jenna said. "West is back toward the camp." A chill ran through Claire. "No, that can't be right. We didn't turn around. We've been going straight." They all looked back the way they came. The road behind them stretched into the distance, curving out of sight among the trees. It looked identical to the road ahead. "Maybe the compass is off," Danny said, but he didn't sound convinced. He looked up at the sky through the canopy. The sun was hidden behind gathering gray clouds, diffusing the light. It was hard to tell direction without a clear view. Mike's face darkened. "Are you saying we might be lost on a one-lane road?" Jenna's breathing quickened. "We shouldn't be. We only went one way. But I swear I recognize that fallen log." She pointed to a mossy, rotting trunk by the roadside. "I saw it when we drove in, and then again a few minutes ago." Claire's mouth felt dry. It was as if the landscape were repeating, looping back on itself. Danny tried to stay calm. "Let's mark this spot to be sure." He walked to the fallen log Jenna indicated and broke off a branch. With his pocket knife, he carved a quick X into the bark. Everyone watched silently, tense. They set off again, moving as fast as they dared on the uneven ground. The trees around them started to blur with motion and fear. A few minutes later, Jenna cried out, "Stop!" There, on the left side of the road, was a fallen mossy trunk. Danny approached it slowly and brushed aside some lichen. The faint carving of an X stared back at them. It was the same log. They had somehow circled back without ever leaving the road. "This is impossible," Danny said, voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Mike looked like he might be sick. "We're trapped. How can we be trapped in the open?" Claire felt panic rising. She forced it down, trying to think. Maybe we passed a side trail without noticing and it looped around. Even she didn't believe her own words. There had been no side trail. Jenna clutched the small necklace she always wore, a St. Christopher medallion for protection. "It won't let us leave," she whispered, tears in her eyes. At those words, the woods seemed to darken, as if dusk had suddenly fallen. Claire realized with dread that the gray clouds had thickened overhead, making it unnaturally dim for what should be early afternoon. The air felt heavier too, charged with the promise of a storm. Then, from far in the distance, back toward the camp, came a sound that made each of them shudder. It was the faint tolling of a bell. Dong. 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 3 chimes, slow and deliberate. It sounded like the camp's old dinner bell they'd seen rusting outside the mess hall. No wind, no animals, just that haunting bell. And then silence. "We need to get off this road," Danny decided, jaw clenched. "We'll cut through the woods toward the highway. I think it's roughly southeast from here. if the road is somehow looping west. He looked at Jenna for confirmation. She sniffled and nodded. That might work. The highway wasn't too far through the forest. A couple miles, maybe. If we go straight in that direction, she pointed, orienting herself by the still glowing compass on her phone and the barely there position of the sun. We should hit it. Mike took a deep breath. All right, let's do it, as long as it's away from here. Leaving the relative clarity of the road was daunting, but staying on it seemed useless. They stepped off into the trees, Danny leading, using his compass watch to try and hold a steady course. Claire stayed directly behind him, with Jenna and Mike close behind. The forest floor was uneven and cluttered with underbrush, fallen branches, and rocks. Progress was slower, but they were all spurred by fear. Minutes stretched on. The further they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. The undergrowth thickened, and at times it felt like unseen eyes peered from the shadows. Once, Claire stumbled on a root, and Danny caught her. They paused, and in that still moment, she heard a sound she hoped never to hear again. A child's voice, very close by, whispering her name. Claire! Her blood turned to ice. She looked around frantically. Did you hear that? She asked. Jenna nodded, eyes huge. It said Claire. Mike brandished a heavy branch he'd picked up as a walking stick. Show yourself! He yelled desperately into the trees. What do you want? The only response was a soft giggle, moving away to their right. Danny motioned them to keep going. Ignore it. Just ignore it, and keep moving, he urged, though his voice trembled too. They pressed on, hearts pounding. The forest was playing tricks now. Claire occasionally heard footsteps, paralleling theirs, an echo that didn't belong. Jenna swore she saw someone darting between trees up ahead. But when they reached the spot, no one was there. At one point, Mike yelped as something tugged on his backpack. They all turned to see one of his pack straps dangling, cleanly cut as if by a blade. His water bottle, once clipped to that strap, lay on the ground behind them, the plastic dented as if squeezed by a powerful hand. Mike snatched it up, face white. It's trying to scare us, he said, voice unsteady. Or slow us down. It's working, Jenna whispered. It's just trying to separate us, Danny replied. Don't let it. Stay together. He looked each of them in the eyes, and they nodded. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but who could tell time in this nightmare, they saw a thinning of the trees ahead. I think that's the road, Jenna exclaimed, hope flaring. They pushed through the last of the brush, stepping out onto the same dirt road they had left. Claire looked around in disbelief. There was the familiar curve, the very same fallen log with the X, now on their right side. They had somehow trekked in a circle through the woods, too. Jenna let out a sob of frustration. Mike hurled the walking stick to the ground, face contorted with anger and fear. This can't be happening, he shouted. It was as if the land itself was a maze they couldn't escape, twisting paths and perceptions back onto them. Overwhelmed, Claire felt tears burn her eyes. Danny pulled her into a hug, and she felt him trembling as much as she was. We'll find a way, he whispered, but even he sounded desperate. The light was fading further. Though it was only afternoon, the woods were cast in deep gloom under the heavy clouds. A rumble of thunder growled in the distance. Of course, a storm was coming. Jenna wiped her eyes. Maybe if we just keep following the road, it will eventually lead out. Maybe it was just one weird loop. It sounded feeble, but what else could they do? They began walking again, silent and spooked. The thunder grew louder, closer, and soon fat raindrops began to patter on the leaves. The prospect of being lost out here in the dark and in the rain spurred them into a light jog. Lightning flickered, and in that brief flash, Claire saw a silhouette on the road ahead, maybe 50 feet away. She halted so suddenly that Jenna bumped into her. Another flash. The figure was gone. Claire's hands were shaking. Up ahead. I thought I saw... A clap of thunder interrupted her. The rain was coming down harder now, a steady shower that made it harder to see and hear. "We need shelter!" Danny shouted over the growing din. "We'll get soaked and freeze if we stay out here." Up ahead, they noticed a narrow side path that hadn't been obvious before, now slightly illuminated by the next flash of lightning. Perhaps a maintenance trail branching off. With no better option, they followed it, hoping it might lead to some outbuilding or cover to wait out the weather and regroup. The path was muddy and winding. After a few hundred feet, a structure emerged on their right. A large wooden building with a collapsed roof on one side. Perhaps an old storage shed or chapel. It was half ruined, but one end still had an intact overhang. They dashed under the overhang just as the downpour intensified, crowding together by what remained of a doorway. Each of them was soaked, hair plastered, clothes dripping. Jenna sneezed and hugged herself, shivering. Inside the open doorway was darkness, but at least it was dry. Danny shone his flashlight in. It appeared to be a storage shed or workshop. Rusted tools hung on a far wall, and stacks of warped lumber or old camp equipment lined one side. There was space enough to step in and be fully out of the rain. "Let's get inside a bit more," Danny said, leading Claire carefully over the threshold, avoiding some broken glass. Mike and Jenna followed, and they shut the rickety door as best they could. The rain drummed on the remaining roof and ground outside, a roar that filled the silence between thunderclaps. Claire leaned against a wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart felt like a drum in her chest that wouldn't stop. They were all terrified. She knew it by the wide-eyed looks and heavy breaths, but seeing Danny's determined face gave her a shred of comfort. He wouldn't stop fighting to get them out. Lightning lit up the interior through gaps in the boarded windows. In those split-second strobes of light, they could see the outline of the storage room. Old tools, a lawnmower rusting in the corner, shelves with paint cans, and in the back, something like a tall metal locker. Jenna sank to the floor, wiping rain off her glasses. "This is a nightmare," she said softly. "How do we get out of here? It's like the woods are alive or possessed." Mike sat down next to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. He didn't have any jokes left. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't think any of us have dealt with something like this." Danny paced a little, running a hand through his wet hair. "There has to be a way to break whatever... I don't know, curse this is. Maybe we need to confront it head on." Claire looked up at him, alarmed. "Confront it? You mean... find it? That thing out there?" "Maybe," Danny said, voice grim. "We keep running and it keeps leading us in circles. It obviously doesn't want us to leave. So maybe the only way out is through. Through... it?" Jenna's voice trembled. Claire understood his line of thought. If a ghost or spirit had trapped them. Sometimes in stories you had to appease it or defeat it. Could be it wanted something. "Tommy," she said quietly. "If it's Tommy's ghost, maybe he wants us to find him. Or maybe he wants a friend." Mike looked around at the dark room. What about the counselor? Or the whistling groundskeeper? The handprints on the car were more than one kid. Unless ghosts can clone themselves. Claire suppressed a shudder at the memory of those multiple prints. There might be more than one spirit, or one that can pretend to be many. Danny leaned against the wall, clenching his fists. Whatever it is, it's hurting us, pushing us deeper. Maybe to where Tommy died, or where Hale died. Jenna suddenly sat up straight. "The tree," she said. "The article said Hale was found hanging from a tree near where Tommy went missing. If we find that tree, maybe we'll find some answers," Claire finished, catching on, "or something to reason with." Mike got to his feet, clearly not thrilled. So, you're suggesting we find the tree where a guy hanged himself 30 years ago, in this storm, and hope that solves things? Do you have a better idea? Danny replied, not unkindly. Mike sighed and shook his head. The rain kept pounding, but their resolve hardened. Once the storm let up a little, they'd try. In the meantime, they decided to look around the shed, in case there was anything useful. Claire and Jenna rummaged through a few crates and cabinets. They found an old oil lantern and, miraculously, a sealed can of kerosene. Danny worked on filling the lantern, and soon a steady orange glow filled the space, easing their reliance on flashlights and warming them slightly. Mike found a rusted camping axe and took it, for comfort if nothing else. Might not do much to a ghost, but having something in my hand helps, he said. In a cupboard, Claire discovered a rolled-up paper tied with twine. She brought it into the lantern light and they realized it was a map. A layout of Wood Smoke Ranch and the surrounding trails, likely for campers or staff. Eagerly, they spread it on the floor. The map showed the main camp buildings, cabins, mess hall, lake dock, etc., and several trails branching out. One trail extended far from the camp into the woods, marked with a red X at the end, and a notation, "Old hanging tree. Do not enter." Claire's breath caught. "Look," she pointed. The old hanging tree was likely a landmark even before the tragedy. Maybe an ancient tree that the camp lore had turned into a ghost story after hail. "That's got to be it," Jenna said. "The map even warns not to enter, probably after what happened." The location was northwest of the main camp, off a side trail called Raven's Path. If only they had this map earlier, but at least now they had a target. The storm began to ease after about a half hour. It was late afternoon by their watches, but the sky was still overcast, and a mist curled among the trunks as the rain tapered off. Lantern in hand, Danny led them out. They decided to keep the lantern even though it was day, as the woods were dim and it felt safer to have a flame. The map was carefully folded and tucked in Claire's pack for reference. They followed what they could find of Raven's Path, which was narrow and nearly vanished under ferns and mud. It was clear no one had officially hiked it in years. Tree blazes, old painted markers on trunks, occasionally confirmed they were on the right track. As they progressed, an uncanny quiet settled once more. Claire felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Anticipation coiled in her stomach with every step. After walking for about 20 minutes, they arrived at a clearing encircled by gnarled oaks and pines. In the center stood a massive, ancient tree, its branches twisted and bare of leaves. Despite the summer greenery around, the ground beneath it was barren, forming a natural circle of earth as if nothing dared grow in its shadow. All of them stopped at the edge of the clearing. The air here was markedly colder. Claire felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "The hanging tree," she murmured. Jenna touched her medallion and whispered a prayer under her breath. They stepped forward together, eyes scanning the area. The tree's lower limb, thick as a man's torso, jutted out about 10 feet above the ground. From it hung a tattered length of rope. Claire's throat tightened. The rope swayed slightly as if freshly disturbed. Perhaps the storm wind, she thought. Though here in the sheltered clearing, the air was still. Under the tree, the ground looked oddly stained in patches. In the lantern light, Claire thought of spilled ink or ancient blood, though it was likely just dark moss or fungus. Danny held the lantern high. "Richard Hale," he called out, voice echoing unnaturally in the clearing. "We're here. Tommy? Is anyone here?" His words faded into the mist. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the drip of water from leaves and the distant rumble of thunder moving away. Then Jenna inhaled sharply and pointed. There! On the far side of the great tree, a faint figure stood among the mottled shadows. It was a man in a camp counselor's uniform, the outline semi-transparent against the gloom. His head hung at an odd angle, chin touching his chest. As he slowly lifted his face toward them, The lantern light revealed bulging, sightless eyes, and the dark bruise of a rope burn around his neck. Claire clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a cry. Mike swore under his breath, tightening his grip on the axe. Danny stepped back, nearly bumping into Jenna. The ghost of Richard Hale moved in a jerky motion, stepping closer. His boots didn't make a sound on the bare ground. The rope around his neck trailed behind him, one end still attached to the limb above. His lips twitched into a grotesque semblance of a smile as he regarded the four friends. Suddenly, the apparition flickered and vanished, only to reappear an instant later right in front of them, inches from Danny's face. Hale's dead eyes stared into Danny's, and his mouth opened in a silent, unnatural grin. Danny yelped and stumbled back, dropping the lantern. The flame flickered but stayed lit on the ground, casting upward shadows that made the ghost's face even more horrifying. The ghost loomed tall over the group, head cocked unnaturally to the side. Then the ghost spoke, a guttural rasp, like wind through a hollow bone. "Stay. Forever." Claire felt the word like a cold breeze across her soul. The whisper they'd heard throughout had coalesced into this demand. In that moment, figures emerged from the trees at the clearing's edge. Pale, luminescent shapes of children. At least half a dozen, all with eyes that glowed faintly. They ranged in age. Some in old-fashioned camp t-shirts, one in a swimsuit with water dripping from her form, another clutching a teddy bear to his translucent chest. They formed a ragged circle around the friends. One little girl, missing an arm, giggled that eerie giggle. A boy with hollow eyes and a neck twisted at a wrong angle, had he fallen from somewhere, stared blankly. They were not solid. Claire could see faint outlines of trees through them, but they felt real, present. Among them, stepping forward, was a small boy whose face Claire recognized from the newspaper photo. Tommy Martinez's ghost gazed up at them. His expression was sad, almost apologetic. In his hand, he held a stuffed toy rabbit missing an ear. It was overwhelming. Fear, sorrow, disbelief all crashed over Claire. These were lost souls of the ranch, she realized. Perhaps children who never left this place, even in death. More than just Tommy, maybe other children drawn here over the years by the curse, or victims of the entity that Hale had become. Hale's ghost turned to regard the children, and then the living intruders, as if considering his next move. The rope around his neck slithered like a snake, tightening and then loosening. He hissed, "Mine. They are all mine." Jenna was trembling violently, tears streaming. "This can't be real," she whimpered. Mike moved in front of her, brandishing the axe. "Leave us alone," he shouted at the ghosts, his voice cracking. We don't mean you any harm." The ghost children stared with empty eyes. Tommy stepped forward, raising a hand toward Claire, mouth opening as if to speak. But no sound came out. Hale snarled, and a sudden force yanked Tommy back. The boy's ghost was jerked as if by invisible strings back to Hale's side. Hale then lifted his arm and pointed at the group. His mouth opened wide, wider than any human mouth could, jaw unhinging. And from his gaping maw came a cacophony of overlapping whispers. "Stay with us. Play. Forever. Never leave." The voices of children and adults blended into a ghastly chorus. Claire felt her knees weaken. The whispering voices weren't just heard by her ears. They pressed into her mind. She felt an urge to step forward, to obey, to give in to the lull of those voices promising something. She took one faltering step. Danny grabbed her hand, squeezing hard, anchoring her. He pulled her slightly behind him again. "Claire, don't," he warned, eyes wide with fear for her. Hale's eyes flicked to their joined hands, and he scowled. With a flick of his wrist, an invisible force slammed into Danny, sending him flying back against the tree. Danny hit the trunk with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground, dazed. The rope on the tree swung wildly as if rejoicing. "No!" Claire screamed, rushing toward Danny. But before she could reach him, one of the ghost children, the girl missing an arm, stepped into her path, shaking her head with a sad expression. Her single hand reached out toward Claire. The temperature around Claire plummeted. She could see her breath mist in the air. Frost began to crackle over the grass at her feet. Mike, adrenaline surging, charged through and swung the axe at the ghostly girl as if to shoo her away. The blade passed through the child's form, striking the ground. The ghost girl vanished with a pitiful whimper, reappearing a few yards away, clutching her teddy bear stump-armed, looking more hurt than angry. But Mike had drawn Hale's wrath. The ghost counselor's form blurred and rushed. Mike, ghostly hands outstretched. Mike tried to dodge, but those cold, dead fingers grazed his arm. 4 gashes appeared instantly on Mike's bicep, blood welling as if scratched by sharp nails. Mike cried out, dropping the axe. Jenna ran to Mike's side, grabbing his arm to stanch the bleeding with her sleeve. "We have to do something!" she cried. Claire was by Danny now, helping him sit up. He groaned, holding the back of his head, but his eyes were clear. "I'm okay," he managed, though he looked stunned. The ghost children began to close in, forming a tightening circle. They whispered, in unison now, a haunting lullaby of murmurs. Hale stood at the center, the puppet master, his hollow gaze fixed on the 4 living friends. Claire racked her brain. How to fight a ghost, let alone many? They had managed to disrupt something by burning the rope earlier at the campsite. But here was the rope's source, the very noose Hale died on. Perhaps it tied him here. Her eyes fell on the rope swinging overhead. The end was still attached to the branch, the rest dangling toward the ground. If they could sever that rope, maybe it would break his hold. The lantern still flickered on the ground, where Danny had dropped it. Its glass, somehow unbroken. Claire made a decision. Keeping low, she darted toward the lantern and snatched it up. "Jenna!" Claire shouted over the whispers. "Help me with the rope." She pointed upward. Jenna understood immediately. Despite shaking with fear, she let go of Mike and dashed toward the tree. The rope's end was just a few feet above her reach, swinging like a pendulum. Mike, clutching his wounded arm, realized the plan. He scooped up the dropped axe with his other hand and, with a grimace of pain, flung it upward at the rope. The old rusted head flew off the wooden handle mid-throw and disappeared into the dark branches. But the handle itself hit the rope and knocked it slightly askew, causing the rope to catch on a jagged bit of bark and fray. Hale roared in anger, a horrible, wet sound. He must have sensed what they were attempting. His form flickered, and suddenly he was at the tree, grappling with something unseen, perhaps trying to hold the rope together by force of will. The ghost children wailed, swirling around him in confusion. Seizing the moment, Jenna jumped and grabbed the rope's end, hanging all her weight on it. The frayed section tore further with a snap. She tumbled to the ground with a length of rope in her hands, a broken end dangling from the tree above her. Hale's ghost shrieked as if in pain. His body glowed with a harsh light and began to lose shape, the edges dissolving into black mist. The ghost children flickered like candle flames in a breeze. Claire rushed to Jenna's side. "Come on." Together they dragged the length of rope toward the center of the clearing. The rope writhed in their grip like a live thing, but they kept hold. Danny, regaining his feet, stumbled over to them and quickly took the rope from Jenna. "Get back," he told both of them. "I have an idea." He dragged the rope to an old stone fire pit at the base of the tree, likely once used for campfire ceremonies long ago. Holding the rope down against the stone ring with his boot, Danny grabbed the lantern from Claire and smashed it down onto the rope with a grunt of effort. The lantern burst, glass shattering, kerosene flaring. A ribbon of fire leapt up along the coil of rope, racing in both directions. The flames eagerly consumed the aged, dry fibers. Hale's scream was ear-splitting. The figure of the ghost counselor writhed, contorting in agony. The noose around his neck, now burning at the end, blazed like a torch, and he clawed at it uselessly. His form began to break apart, as if the flames were consuming not just the rope, but him as well. The ghost children collectively howled or sobbed, a heart-wrenching sound. One by one, they backed away from Hale and the fire. Some looked scared, others strangely at peace. Tommy's ghost drifted to the forefront of the children, watching Hale's demise with a mixture of pity and relief. He then turned his gaze to Claire. For the first time he spoke audibly. "Thank you." His voice was soft, the whisper they had heard, but gentle now. Claire felt tears on her face. She reached a hand out slightly, not daring to go closer to the burning pit. She didn't need to. Tommy gave a small smile, clutching his toy rabbit, and slowly faded. The other children began to fade too, their shapes evaporating into rays of sunlight that pierced the cloud cover at that very moment. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the entire forest. Hale, however, was not gone yet. His ghost, now half the man it was, crawled toward them, face twisted in rage and despair. The fire was dying down, having consumed the rope to blackened ash, but what remained of Hale fixed its hollow eyes on Claire with hatred. "No, I won't go alone," the ghost rasped. In a final lunge, he launched himself at Claire. She barely had time to scream. The ghostly form collided with her, and for an instant she felt an icy cold explode in her chest. It was like falling through a frozen lake. Breath crushed out of her, limbs numb. She glimpsed his face, the specter superimposed inches from her own, eyes pleading and feral all at once. Then Danny was there, pulling her backwards with all his might. Claire stumbled out of the ghost's grasp, falling into Danny's arms. Jenna and Mike, both injured and terrified, still came forward and joined Danny, forming a wall between Claire and Hale. Hale's ghost, weakened and losing cohesion, reached out a wispy hand. It passed through Danny's shoulder without effect. The ghost looked at its own fading arm in horror. The broken axe handle lay at Danny's feet. In a swift motion, Danny snatched it up and swung at Hale's form. It went straight through, of course, but the defiant axe seemed to push the ghost back a step. Hale's features began to melt into indistinct shadows. He locked eyes on Claire one last time. In them, she saw not just fury, but a deep sorrow, a loneliness that spanned decades. Perhaps in death, he had been more monster than man, but in his final second, maybe the man regretted what he'd done. His mouth moved without sound, forming the words, "I'm sorry." Or perhaps, "I'll be back." Claire couldn't be sure. A gust of wind from nowhere swept through the clearing, extinguishing the last of the flames. Hale's ghost dissipated into a swirl of black ash and smoke, sucked upward toward the canopy and scattering into nothingness. Suddenly, everything was still. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the unnatural chill replaced by a warm breeze that stirred the treetops. The heavy clouds were breaking apart, shafts of late-day sun now spearing down. The four friends remained in place, panting, hearts racing, hardly believing it was over. Mike was the first to break the silence, sinking to his knees with a groan. Is it gone?" Jenna, tears still on her cheeks, looked around. The clearing was empty, save for them. The rope was a pile of embers and charred strands. The ghost children had vanished. She nodded slowly. I think so." Claire realized she was clutching something in her hand. Opening her fingers, she found an old, cracked photograph, the one Tommy's ghost had pressed into her palm in the chaos. By some miracle, it hadn't burned. The image was faded, but she could make out a group of campers and counselors smiling by a lake, Hale among them, with his arm around a little boy who must have been Tommy. On the back, scrawled in pen, were the words, "Forgive me." She swallowed a lump in her throat, overcome with emotion. Kneeling by the smoldering ashes of the rope, she gently placed the photo there, a final offering. "I forgive you," she whispered, voice trembling. Whether she spoke to Hale, or Tommy, or the very woods, she wasn't sure. Maybe all of them. A sense of peace seemed to sigh through the clearing, as if the forest itself were grateful. Danny helped Mike to his feet and draped Mike's good arm over his shoulders to support him. "Let's get out of here," Danny said softly. He looked at Claire and Jenna, eyes full of concern. All of us. They left the clearing of the hanging tree, walking back down Raven's Path. The woods felt ordinary now. No looping tricks, no oppressive silence. The sounds of birds and insects gradually returned, and the path led them without incident back to the main dirt road. Incredibly, the road now looked straight and familiar, and within half an hour, they spotted the wooden arch of Woodsmoke Ranch's entrance. Rain-soaked, exhausted, and shaken, they followed the gravel to where their SUV sat waiting. Mike's arm needed proper bandaging, but he insisted they deal with it once far away from this place. He and Jenna climbed gingerly into the back seat. Danny took the driver's seat again, Claire next to him, though they both hesitated a moment before shutting their doors, half expecting some phantom to appear. None did. The forest was just forest. Danny turned the key. The SUV's engine started on the first try, purring steadily. Whatever unnatural hold had stalled, it was gone. They shared a look of profound relief. As they drove out under the archway, Claire looked back one last time. The cabins and trees blurred by, golden in the setting sun. By one cabin, she saw a shape, or thought she did, of a little boy waving. Tommy. His face was peaceful. She blinked, and the figure was gone, but she chose to believe he was truly at rest. The car bumped onto the main road, leaving Woodsmoke Ranch behind for good. In the weeks that followed, the four friends spoke little of their harrowing night. How could they? Who would ever believe them? They themselves sometimes wondered if it had all been a shared hallucination born of group panic. But the healing scratches on Mike's arm and the old newspaper clipping Jenna kept were proof enough. Jenna wrote a careful entry on her blog about Woodsmoke Ranch, omitting the supernatural parts. She suggested the place should remain undisturbed due to unsafe conditions. A month later, she was relieved to hear the land was being evaluated by the state for demolition and reforestation. "Let it be a place for trees and sunlight," she said to Claire, "not memories." Mike, ever the skeptic turned believer, found himself checking over his shoulder on quiet nights, half expecting to see a little hand pressed against his window. He even joked once, weakly, that he missed when the scariest part of camping was mosquitoes, but he, too, carried a new gentle respect, even sadness, for the unseen things that might linger in forgotten places. Danny and Claire grew closer than ever after that day. Surviving a nightmare together has a way of bonding souls. Sometimes when Claire woke from a nightmare of whispers and woods, Danny was right there to comfort her, assuring her it was over. They were safe. Yet, in the back of Claire's mind, usually in that delicate hour of night when all is quiet, she would recall the final moment in the clearing, the look in Hale's eyes as he vanished. She wondered if truly all the spirits had been freed, or if some fragment of that darkness remained. One autumn evening, as Claire tidied her desk, she found something wedged in her notebook, something she didn't remember putting there. It was the photograph from Woodsmoke Ranch, the one she left on the tree's ashes. The words, "Forgive me," were still scrawled on the back. Claire's breath caught. How had it gotten here? Had she retrieved it without thinking? Or had someone delivered it to her? A chill crept over her as she sat down heavily in her chair, staring at those faces from 1989. That night, Claire dreamed of a campfire under the stars and children laughing. Among them, a boy with a toy rabbit laughed the loudest, free at last. But at the edge of the woods, a tall shadow watched the children with hollow eyes. When Claire turned to look, it vanished behind a tree. In the dream, she walked to the tree and found a rope hanging there, swinging, the shadow of a man just visible among the leaves. She awoke with a start, heart pounding. In the darkness of her bedroom, for just a moment, she thought she heard a faint creak, like a rope under tension, or perhaps a swing in the breeze. Claire held her breath, listening. The sound stopped. Only the familiar hum of the city night remained. She got up and went to the window, gazing at the silent street below. Nothing unusual. Yet as she turned away, there came a soft whisper, so quiet she almost missed it. "Thank you." It could have been her mind playing tricks, or a passing breeze catching the eaves just right. Claire closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. "Goodbye," she whispered back, whether to the voice or the memory, even she didn't know. Outside, a light autumn wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it what sounded like distant, fading laughter. Or perhaps just the ordinary wind after all. Claire climbed back into bed and curled into Danny's sleeping form, seeking the comfort of the present. As she drifted off, one final thought crossed her drowsy mind. Some whispers would forever haunt the woods of Woodsmoke Ranch, and some might still follow those who dared to listen. In the quiet that followed, somewhere on the edge of sleep, Claire thought she heard the faintest echo of a campfire crackling, and a whisper that simply said, "Good night." And it left her unsettled, wondering if the horrors of Woodsmoke Ranch were truly over, or if in dark and silent moments they would always be listening, always be waiting, with a soft giggle or a whisper just beyond the realm of the living.